Zombies. They've stalked our nightmares for centuries. Ancient folklore. Voodoo curses. Biological nightmares. Apocalypse warnings. They're not just fiction. They're a reflection of us. Mindless, ravenous, unstoppable. From the dark rituals of Haitian Vodou to the fast-moving terrors of modern apocalypses, we'll uncover the origins, legends, and science behind the undead. Are zombies mindless monsters, or mirrors of our own fears and flaws? Whether they crawl from the grave or sprint through the streets, one thing is certain. When the dead rise, the rules of the living die. Welcome to the season finale of Project Black Garden, a Monsters and Myths podcast. Season 1, The Oleander Files. Episode 13. File number 275. The Zombie. I'm your host, Michael. So, lock your doors, check your pulse, and whatever you do, don't get bitten. Let's begin. The history of zombies are rooted in folklore and have evolved significantly over time. Some say their origins go back to Haitian Vodou and originated with Haitian Vodou beliefs. In Haitian folklore, a zombie is a corpse reanimated by a boko, or sorcerer, using magic or rituals. These zombies were not mindless monsters, but enslaved beings controlled by their creator. This belief may have been influenced by the historical trauma of slavery in Haiti, as zombies symbolized the loss of autonomy and freedom. In African traditions, the concept of the dead returning to life or being controlled by magic can also be traced to African spiritual beliefs brought to the Caribbean by enslaved people. In the 30s and 40s, the Westerns adapt zombies as they first appeared in Western media films like White Zombie. These early depictions were closely tied to Haitian folklore and featured zombies as victims of mystical or supernatural control. In the 60s, the modern zombie as a flesh-eating, undead monster was popularized by films like Night of the Living Dead. These zombies were no longer controlled by magic, but instead reanimated by mysterious scientific or apocalyptic causes. The evolution of zombies in today's media has become metaphors for societal fears, including consumerism, pandemics, and environmental collapse. Now, the characteristics of zombies differ across the cultures and media, but generally share some traits, like the undead state, reanimated corpses, often decayed or decaying, the loss of humanity. A zombie is devoid of intelligence or emotion, driven by primal instincts. Contagion. Many depictions include the idea of zombie bites spreading infection. And the zombie's only weakness? Typically, zombies can be killed by destroying the brain. Scientific and psychological perspectives from some researchers have linked the zombie archetype to psychological or neurological conditions. Catatonic states, for instance, are similar to zombification in voodoo. Rabies, behaviors resembling aggression, confusion, or loss of control. And finally, cultural fears. Zombies reflect fears of death, disease, and societal breakdown. Now, I saved this episode for the finale of the season because it was one of the most detailed files in my great Uncle Sam's journal. Sketches, photographs, audio, and video, all documenting my great uncle's experience and the physical scars that it left. And they are just as awful as you think they are. And as a reminder, all names, dates, and locations have been changed except my great Uncle Sam, for my protection and for all victims' families' protection. This one gets bloody fast. Here we go. Now this file begins with Team 7734 flying into the cold and white Alaskan town of Nome, just as the night wrapped itself around them. Now my great Uncle Sam liked to keep his team fresh and give promising recruits a chance on a mission whenever allowed. So he and First Lieutenant Johnny, one of the newer recruits to Team Hell, welcomed Captain Pierce and Sergeant Perez. Captain Pierce was a big guy, muscles, brains, and a short temper, but a hell of a soldier. Sergeant Perez, she was the fittest of all four of them, in fantastic shape, genius level intelligence, but still managed to be soft-spoken, even when the task at hand required her to be anything but quiet. The four rolled through town, heading for their secret location, a local house on the edge of town, a town with a population of just over 500 souls. And during this journey, there were no lights to other vehicles on the street, no movement from any people walking the streets, not even any stray animals or local wildlife anywhere. It was as if the city was already a ghost town. And that's why they were there, to assess the situation. As their vehicle stopped at the final destination, the local mayor's 2-story house, and they made their way to the front door, a weary Johnny jokingly called out, "I'm getting a bad feeling about this." My Uncle Sam just shook his head and said, "Man, all the worst stories start with those words." The four soldiers looked at each other with mild shrugs as Captain Pierce knocked on the front door. There was no answer. Uncle Sam told him to do it again, this time with more force, and when he did, the door pushed open. They slowly readied themselves and made their way in. It was obvious something was wrong, not just here in the foyer of this strange house, but in the town itself. It was almost like the air was cursed. My Uncle Sam sent the team to search the house as he called headquarters to report what they have found so far. Shortly thereafter, it was apparent that the sheriff was no longer in the house, but something was off. That's when Sergeant Perez noticed the blood on the outside of the windows, but not just one or two, most of the windows, including the second floor windows. Johnny readied his weapon and shook his head and said, "Yeah, definitely have a bad feeling about this one." Suddenly, from the doorway, a shadow emerged with a thick, gurgling moan. All four soldiers whipped around to find the owner of the house, Sheriff Gardner, but he was no longer human. He was missing half his face, teeth, mandible exposed, Chunks had been ripped from his chest and legs, and his arms dangled in meaty tendrils. The rest of his torso and face were sunken in, as if malnourished, like frozen beef jerky. Dead eyes searched the room in front of it, and when the smell of the first soldier hit Sheriff Gardner's nose, his bloody teeth clacked together in a sickening chomp, and a gasp escaped his lungs as he lunged forward, slamming into Captain Pierce, who managed to avoid any damaging contact or bite and spun the sheriff onto the floor, followed by a giant boot upon his chest. The monstrous sheriff clawed and snapped and jerked and twitched from under his giant boot, trying to grab at any flesh. Captain Pierce's eyes grew wide with understanding as he placed his M4 to the temple of the cursed man. My great Uncle Sam said from over his shoulder, "Zombies. Fuck. I hate zombies." Instantly, Sergeant Perez spun around and called out, "Movement, south window," her breath fogging the air as she raised her rifle. Captain Pierce hesitated no longer and put a bullet in the moaning, zombified sheriff below him. Just in time, too, because from the front door, Lieutenant Johnny announced, "We're no longer alone, guys." He ran to the front door, slamming it closed and sliding a nearby desk in front of it. He did it so quickly that the rest of them didn't even have a chance to see what he had seen through the doorway. More shadows seemed to walk past not only the southern window, but all the windows. My great Uncle Sam quickly asked, "What did you see, Johnny?" Johnny smiled and said, "I think I found the rest of them." Uncle Sam said, "The rest of who?" Johnny let out a laugh and said, "The town of Nome." Just then, the horde of undead slammed into the windows in jerky, unnatural bursts, faces pale as bone, eyes hollow and dead. They moved fast, jerking unnaturally like broken marionettes. As the team readied themselves for the attack, Captain Pierce asked, "How many people live in this godforsaken town?" Sergeant Perez, without missing a beat, said, 497. Pierce looked down at the dead corpse of the sheriff and said, 496. She shook her head and said, "I had already accounted for him, asshole." The sounds outside the house and the windows grew louder as more bodies pushed themselves against the walls. Glass began to crack, giving way to the force of dozens of dead bodies pushing against him. Within seconds, the house fell dark as the power was cut, a devastating consequence from the unrelenting horde smashing into every inch of the house. As the first few windows gave and the shattered glass peppered the floor, the cold, snowy wind cut through the house immediately, bringing with it the scent of dead flesh and rotting corpses. Johnny spun himself around with his back to the other soldiers and readied his attack as he called out, "Great. Either we get eaten or we freeze to death. We gotta go. We gotta run, guys." My great Uncle Sam searched the scene quickly and evaluated their situation, which was not good. And he ordered, "If we run, we die." And Johnny bit back, "Yeah, but if we stay, we die slower." Uncle Sam looked him directly in the eye and said, "Pick your poison." Sergeant Perez had enough of the pissing contest and knew their only way out was to fight. And the longer they waited, the harder it would be. She gripped her rifle and said through clenched teeth, "We die? Not unless we make them die first." The pathetic barricade at the front door was buckled under the weight of the rotting bodies, and the house filled with guttural shrieks of the dead townspeople. All four fired immediately in all directions, Pierce taking out at least a half dozen before he succumbed to the first bite, which only seemed to make him fight harder. He slammed against Johnny as they continued their attack, laying out 24 bodies before just enough zombies pushed their way back into Pierce and knocking Johnny to the floor. Pierce succumbed to 2 more bites, this time staggering him and making him lose movement in his left arm. He managed to stumble back to his feet and continued his attack, more angry than he ever was. He called out over his shoulder, "Get upstairs! Get out of here! I'll handle this." My Uncle Sam killed everything that moved and pointed at Sergeant Perez to help Johnny to the top floor. He was in shock, but still fighting on his back. She grabbed him by the collar and made her way to the stairs, shooting anything that moved. My great uncle followed, calling out to Pierce with one last gaze, knowing he sacrificed himself to save them, even if it was only for a moment. Captain Pierce's screams managed to cut out the rest of the horrible sound of attack, even if it was only for a few seconds, as his body was torn to shreds and eaten. As the 3 made their way up the stairs, they were quickly followed. A surge of the undead rumbled along behind them, limbs frozen and brittle, teeth chattering, bones cracked with every step. Uncle Sam killed as many as he could as they rushed up the staircase, reloading quickly and trying to keep his nerve, as it became abundantly clear that he didn't have enough ammo for every person from the town of Nome. And as they got to the top of the stairs, it was even worse. An overflow of bodies had gotten through the roof. A literal wave of zombies fell upon Johnny, who was immediately torn in two, literally, his torso vanishing into the writhing sea of bodies while his legs kicked once, twice, and then went still. Sam and Perez managed to slip into a bedroom, barricading the door with a dresser. Both of them, their breath ragged. Sergeant Perez's arm was gushing blood, but not from a bite. She had torn it on some of the damage the zombies made as they had fallen through the roof. Samuel looked at her ready to fight and said, "Are you good?" She wrapped up her arm, cutting the blood flow, letting the cold of the night numb her, but she didn't feel the cold anymore, only rage. And she promised, "I'm not dying in the snow. Not like this." My great uncle Sam removed something from his back pocket, sliding across the floor to Sergeant Perez. As she picked up the tiny remote with blinking green and red lights, my great uncle said, "Then we take them all with us." She nodded, whispering one word, "Fubar." From the small device came a voice warning that approaching Hellfire drone was only moments away, and these drones only had one purpose: to wipe whatever it targeted off the face of the earth. My great uncle knew they only had a few minutes, and he grabbed Sergeant Perez by the hand, pulled her closer, and said, "It's been an honor, soldier." She shook her head no, and then pointed over my great uncle's shoulder to the back of the room, where an old, vintage bathtub stuck from the corner, covered in glass and debris. My uncle shook his head. "You think it'll work?" She said, "What the hell else are we gonna do?" Suddenly, another wave of zombies broke open the door, shoving debris to its side as if it was made of paper. A few stragglers fell from the roof, impaling themselves on broken debris, but still reaching and grabbing for Sam and Perez. They shot as many of them as they could before both leaping into the bathtub and ramming it onto its side, pulling it over the top of each other. The snapping snarls, teethy growls disappeared in a bright hum of orange fire. The sound was everywhere, muffled and tinny inside this ancient bathtub. Then, my great-uncle said he was left with nothing but a ringing in his ears and a staticky hum everywhere. The explosion was massive and tore the house in half. Fire lit up the Alaskan sky like a second miniature sun. When the backup arrived and the snow finally settled again, only 2 figures emerged from the smoke, bloody, burned, limping, but alive. My great-uncle Sam took most of the damage, but Sergeant Perez helped him onto the evacuation chopper. He nodded thank you, sizing up the Armageddon-like scene around them when it hit him that he lost another member of Team Hell. First Lieutenant Johnny had only been with the team for a dozen or so adventures, but it was long enough for my great-uncle Sam to regret that he didn't do more to protect him. Now the military documented everything, and my great-uncle managed to get out video footage and pictures, and even a small test sample from one of the charred zombies. And as soon as I find out a way to share this safely, I will. My great-uncle later learned that the zombie outbreak was brought on by a strange radiation from a UFO crash site 20 miles outside of Nome. But that's a story for another time. As I wind down the first season of The Black Garden, I've decided to leave you with one final update. I'm still being watched, but they're hiding it better these days. But I think going public with my story is the best way to protect me. And also, I finally heard back from my brother. Now, it was a little awkward and a little nerve-wracking, but I think he understands what I'm dealing with now, because he was just made aware that he had been left a package too. And when he opened it, he found 7 more journals. Now he wants nothing to do with them. It looks like I'll be inheriting them shortly. So I'm going to continue my paranormal journey and share the next journal that my father had left me. And in my great-uncle's handwriting, it's designated as the Snapdragon Files. And let me tell you, there's some crazy stories in this one. So this is what I need from you listeners and fellow gardeners. Keep writing me. Keep sending me your stories. Keep sharing the podcast. There's more of us out there, and they can't keep us all quiet. Let's do this together. And for the last time, in Season 1, the Oleander Files. This is Project Black Garden, a Monsters and Myths podcast. My name is Michael, and I cannot wait to share what's next. But remember, monsters are real. Myths are born from truth, but the truth will not stay hidden forever.